You see this? Yep, you got it. It's a clay ball. But there's a lot more to it. Type of clay, color, composition, grog, shrinkage, firing temperature, absorption rate, warping, and everything you need to know and understand to pick your clay. Let's dive into it right away. Hey there, Greg here. I was filming the making of a beginner's pot, a super simple one to demonstrate the basics. And as I was filming, I realized that to make certain things clear for beginners, I had to dive into a bunch of basic clay concepts. And I couldn't even start making the pot until about 30 minutes of explanation. So I stopped the episode, thinking it might be better to start by making a guide to all these essential notions. And let me tell you, beginners always ask me the same question on repeat. Don't worry, I ask exactly the same question when I start. And the number one question every single day is, which clay should I buy?
Which clay should I buy?
Closely followed by, can I do ceramic in my kitchen oven? So let's tackle those questions.
I will sometimes simplify and generalize. I'm not going to talk about specific cases.
I remember the first time I did pottery. It was a small earthenware pot. Back then, I didn't even know what earthenware was. And like many beginners, I thought I could fire my pottery in my kitchen oven. Yeah, I started from scratch too. I still have this little pot. Later, I glazed it when I got my first real ceramic kiln. It's a collector for sure. Usually, it's around that time when you think, hey, pottery is easy. No. So let's start with the basics. Pottery involves objects made with fire-red clays. Cement pots, polymer pots, self-hardening clay pots, those aren't pottery. And if your mugs, vases, flower pots are mostly ceramic and not made of cement or modeling clay, there's gotta be a good reason for it. But one day I'll talk about this alternative technique, which aren't really alternative. There are three main categories of pottery clay: earthenware, stoneware, and porcelain. The first thing that sets them apart is their firing temperature. Earthenware is fired at low temperature, stoneware at medium temperature, and porcelain at high temperature. But with material evolution, there's no much temperature difference between stoneware and porcelain these days. Today you can commonly find porcelain that fires at the same temperature as stoneware. The main advantage of earthenware is its cost. It's cheaper than stoneware, unlike porcelain, which is quite expensive. And this cost advantage becomes even more significant when you consider the firing cost. High temperature firings are much more expensive in terms of energy than earthenware firings. Another advantage of earthenware is its lower firing temperature, which allows for a wider range of colors and glazes. At high temperatures, most materials burn and disappear, limiting the use of colorants or oxides. But the appeal of porcelain lies in its white color, not so much its glaze palette. Where earthenware starts to pose a problem is in its durability. Stoneware is much more resilient and durable than earthenware. Porcelain is a bit less resistant to shocks and chipping than stoneware, but still superior to earthenware. And the main drawback of earthenware is its porosity. Stoneware and porcelain are vitrified clays, meaning they are non-porous, while earthenware remains porous. Yes, earthenware is a porous material. That's why your dishes are covered in glaze. Without glaze, your plate will absorb all liquids, water, grease. For all of these reasons, earthenware is preferred for tableware or interior decoration, where durability is not paramount. Stoneware is chosen for its resistance to shock and freezing. It's a good choice where durability is necessary, such as floors or utilitarian pottery. As for porcelain, which also resists freezing, it's mainly used for its translucent appearance and whiteness. By now you should have an idea of what type of clay you need. Personally, since most of my pots are for outdoors, I mainly work with stoneware. If you're wondering about raku, raku is not a clay, but rather a firing technique. Raku involves removing the piece from the kiln between 800 and 1000 degrees Celsius and placing it in contact with flammable materials to create chemical reaction in the glaze. Many people discover pottery through the practice of raku because it's a more accessible firing method, and quite a few people DIY their own raku kiln with old metal cans. But it's a low temperature firing. Typically, highly grogged clay is used. It's purely decorative and not very durable. Now, if you visit a pottery supply store, you'll notice there are many different earthenware, stoneware and porcelain options. So, we will have to sort through them again. We could again divide these clays into three categories: color, manufacturer, or more precisely clay composition specific to each manufacturer, and grog. Color is mostly an aesthetic choice. Since earthenware is porous and meant to be glazed, the color range is mainly limited to white and red. Occasionally you'll find colored earthenware, but they're often expensive and not widely used. Stoneware, being able to be left unglazed, comes in a wider range of natural colors from white to various shades of brown. These hues are either natural or achieved through the addition of inexpensive oxides like iron or manganese. Porcelain is almost exclusively white, and for all these clays, you can add colorants to the white clay. There's a wide range of colors available to achieve the clay tint you desire, but it's a costly process, usually reserved for small amounts of clay. As for the manufacturer, you'll need to test different clays because their texture, plasticity and behavior are more personal criteria. You need to determine which clay you enjoy working with. A criterion that might be important to some is its origin. The clay brands near you are probably different from mine. Clay is a local product. It's heavy and expensive to transport, so the clay you find likely comes from quarries in a region relatively close to you. Importing clay from the other side of the world would be economically and ecologically nonsensical. A very significant factor, yet often ignored by potters who work with stoneware, is its absorption rate after firing. If you ask a potter who works with stoneware if their pots are frost resistant, they likely say, "Of course, because it's stoneware." And if you ask them about the absorption rate of their clay, they probably won't know. In reality, when we say stoneware is frost resistant, it's a misuse of language. Even though stoneware is vitrified, it still remains slightly porous. It's the absorption rate expressed as a percentage. To be truly frost resistant, this rate should be less than 1%. But commercial stoneware generally has a rate between 1 and 10%. Personally, I'd say a decent rate should be below 5%. Beyond that, the risk of breakage in humid environment subjected to freezing becomes significant. But it's entirely arbitrary. It's just a percentage I impose to myself based on my experience. So yes, outdoor pottery can break in the frost, but it's still rather rare. Then comes the grog. First, there's smooth clay, which doesn't contain grog. Then there are several sizes of grog, from fine at 0.2 mm, sometimes called impalpable, to coarse grog of 1.5 mm or more. In Europe it's measured in millimeters, but in the USA it's in mesh size. But what you'll find most often is a texture indicator ranging from 1 for smooth to 10 for coarse. When you buy clay with grog, it's expressed in two factors: the size of the grog, that is, the size of the grains, and as a percentage, that is, the amount of grog in the clay. For example, you might have clay with 15% of 1 mm grog. And it's even possible to incorporate grog yourself to make your own blend. And then you might ask, why would I use clay with pebble in it if smooth clay exists? Well, you're right. When starting out, it's best to begin with small pot, so the question doesn't arise, go with smooth clay. If you're throwing as well, it's better to start with smooth clay. Starting to throw with grogged clay is a bit like throwing clay covered in sanding paper. The first time it looked a little like this. But of course, grog has its benefits. It can be an aesthetic choice. Some clay have quite coarse grog that give a unique texture once fired. But the main benefits of grog is to improve its firing resistance. Let me try to explain as clearly as possible what is grog and how it works. Okay. I'm going back to my teacher's voice. In this piece of clay, there are clay particles, of course, but also lots of water and organic matter, that is decomposed plant residues and mineral salts. During drying, much of the water will evaporate. This water loss is the first loss of material, which is why clay shrinks when drying. During the first firing, the organic matter will burn and the clay will shrink again due to this loss of material. Then, at higher temperatures, the clay will fuse, meaning its particles will bind closely together. Upon cooling, the material reorganizes and compacts further, making it stronger. In simple terms, the material will reorganize differently and reduce its volume even more. Once this clay is fired, if you crush it into powder, you get grog. Now, take another piece of clay, incorporate your grog, and that's your grogged clay. The benefit is that now part of your clay has already been fired. A part that has already lost its moisture, burnt its organic matter, and changed its structure. In short, now you have clay that will shrink less and thus deform less, break less. Here you can see a wet clay sample straight out of the package, a dry clay sample, one after the bisque firing and one after the final firing. Notice the size differences. And I should note that it's the same clay each time. Yes, besides changing size, it also changes appearance. There you go, I've told you everything. Now you have all the key to buying your clay.